I love the video games monthly subscription box. Not only do I build my game collection, but I also receive games that I probably never would have batted an eye at otherwise. Ex-Mutants is one such game. I remember popping it in my Retron to check it out, as I do, and found out that for some reason the character's sprite never appears in the game. So it's one of those rare games that doesn't seem to be compatible with my Retron 5. Oh well, emulation exists for a reason, I suppose. Before I even get to the game, let's look at the label. Does this remind you of anything? Like, oh, I don't know, the X-Men? This cover rips it off so blatantly that I would not be surprised if Marvel sued the pants off of Malibu Comics, the owner of the Ex-Mutants comic series. That's right, this is an actual licensed property. So it's probably gonna be bad, isn't it? The whole premise is that the Earth was wiped out and radiation mutated the remaining population into mutants. An evil-looking cyborg that apparently isn't evil is trying to find a way to unmutate the mutations, and in the meantime, recruited some Ex-Mutants, to help his cause. 4 of them are captured by the villain, Sluggo, and now the remaining 2, Aykroyd and Shannon, must save the rest of them. Do they have fancier names? Well, only if you can consider Bud, Dylan, Tanya, and Piper fancy. I must admit, I do not. Anyway, from the start, you do get to choose between Aykroyd and Shannon, and surprisingly, they do have different stats. Aykroyd has an okay speed but can take more hits, along with doing more damage with his battle axe. Shannon has a nunchuck and is therefore the quicker, yet physically weaker character. She does get a slight reach advantage though, which I found to be pretty helpful, especially against bosses. Once you choose your character, you are first thrust into the cyborg's lab, where you must escape into the fire-filled tunnels next door. You'll learn the basics here, as this initial stage is pretty simple to get through. There are a few optional paths that you can explore, leaping around and collecting secondary weapons to use as extra firepower against the few enemies that you'll run into. Right from the start, Ex-Mutants reminds me of an old DOS game. The graphics look like stuff you might have seen in an upgraded Epic or Apogee game, the soundtrack reminds me of MIDI jams, and you collect quite a bit for points, with the font again harking back to the old disk operating system era. I'm not saying that this is a bad thing. In fact, far from it. Growing up in the old school Apogee and Epic Mega Games days, I can definitely appreciate what the developers were going for. The goal is to reach the exit of the stage. I know. Duh. After the lab stage though, you'll need to find a battery pack before reaching the goal. This is because the cyborg leader's power is running out, and if he can't find replacement packs, he'll go offline for eternity, thereby sealing humanity's fate of never existing as non-mutants again. Ooh. That's actually kind of dark. You can probably see that the game is a normal platformer, but there are some things to note. You'll be doing a lot of box breaking, as power-ups are often contained within. These consist of things like a spread shot that is fired whenever you attack with A, different types of bombs that are thrown or dropped with C, coins that give you an extra life when you collect 100, or even just stars and gems that get you some points. Do you need to get this stuff? Nah, but it does help in your journey. Thankfully, you do get a health meter, with the size differing if you are playing as Aykroyd or Shannon. The Axe Battler gets 8 units of health, and the Leotard Wearer gets 6. One thing of note is that you can find rare items that permanently increase the health gauge by 2 units, but I've only ever found one in a hidden area that needs to be blown up by bombs to reach. Thankfully, there's also plenty of chicken that will replenish 2 units of life, and a heart that will max it back up, so the game is nice enough to keep these health items plentiful. Speaking of hidden areas, it's surprising how many and how well they're hidden. Most of them need bombs to open up, but depending on the bomb you have to time its throw to place it in an exact spot. Yes, it's usually worth it, with extra lives, health, and other stuff located in them, but if you can't keep a stock of bombs, then you won't be finding jack. And yes, dying results in losing not only your extra side weapon and bomb, but also your coin reserves. That's right, if you have 99 coins, then die, you'll have to collect all 100 coins from scratch. That kinda sucks. And yes, you will die. A lot. Although the first few stages are kind of easy to get through, with the stage 2 boss having a very recognizable pattern, the next stage, a romp on a minecart, dials that difficulty up to about 8. Holy crap, the amount of lives I threw at this stage alone blew my mind. You can easily fall off the minecart itself, resulting in immediate death. There are plenty of spike traps that need to be ducked under or leapt over. The occasional enemy can be taken out with one hit if you dare to attempt to strike them, and health and even in 1-up will taunt you, but if you miss, there goes a life. When I finally did make it past this, things didn't get any easier. Nope, once you hit that minecart stage, your soul belongs to the game. Sure, you feel like you're making progress, but then you reach this mini-boss. He's not really hard. The hit detection just feels really off when fighting him. It's like I know I should be doing damage to him, as it really looks like the weapon is striking it, but it doesn't always seem to work. But I persevered and made it past him into the next stage. Again, challenging, but not terrible, even though these enemies that materialize from nowhere are kind of annoying. But then the next mini-boss appears, and for the life of me, I cannot figure out how to kill it. If you hit it, it swoops in at you. It launches bombs that erupt into flames, and it's normally out of reach, only able to be struck when it attacks you. No matter how many continues I threw at this stage, and the game gives you a hefty 8 on normal difficulty, I could not defeat this guy. So I had to give up. But there is a code that gives you level select. So I decided to check this out to see what the later stages looked like, because screw it. The stage 3 boss also feels impossible, as he stays out of reach and fires what looks like Contra's spread shot's brother at you, while worms crawl on the ground and attack you. At least the game is kind enough to give you both bombs and a spread shot of your own to combat this guy, but they don't last forever. Level select to the next stage, and it's another auto-scrolling level, this time on a logged down river. Although it has its moments, I found this level to be much easier than the minecart, as believe it or not, I was able to actually complete it fairly easily. The log gives you much more room to move around on, and that helps tremendously. Next up, the sewer levels. I just gave up here. Bats constantly harass you, slime balls grunt in human voices when striking them, random things will blow up and strike you with the sparks. Ugh. After this, you get to ride a subway train, and although not super frustrating, and I think I could get through it if I gave it enough attempts, the enemies have lengthy reaches, rocks will fall, and the bastards with the flails take a ton of hits, often requiring hit-and-run tactics to get past. And I don't recall seeing a checkpoint here either, so if you die, it's back to the start of the level. I believe there are 2 additional stages after this, but I just didn't have the heart to check them out. Even with this massive difficulty curve, the gameplay is still solid. You always feel like you have complete control over your Ex-Mutant. Enemies may take a lot of hits, but once you learn their attack patterns, you can easily strike and evade without taking much damage yourself. Plenty of traps line the stages, but again, simple practice will get you through them. I just really wish the difficulty would have ramped up a bit slower, or maybe relax a bit on how many hits the mini-bosses can take. The graphics for the game impressed me for a game based on a comic series that I've never even heard of. There's some great definition to the playable characters, and the enemy sprites all have color and great detail. The stages also look amazing. The opening lab has walls that are falling apart, electrical beams, random pipes and circuitry, and so on. The caverns have fire that looks pretty neat, and I absolutely love these skulls with fire dripping out of the eyeball and forming a pool underneath. There's also a cool mist effect in the second swamp area. And of course, on the subway, there are a lot of foreground objects that are zooming by. The visuals overall are just really well done. The sound is no less as impressive. The game surprisingly uses the GEMS sound engine, which isn't exactly known for its fantastic tracks, but whoever composed Ex-Mutants' soundtrack knew what they were doing. No, the sound may not blow you away, but it's much better than many other songs I've heard on the system. Personally, I really enjoyed the boss theme and the minecart/long ride tracks. In addition to the soundtrack, there's also some voice clips that you'll hear, and they're actually pretty clear. The characters will spout random one-liners when defeating some enemies, which is pretty neat. Luckily, they aren't repeated so often that you will get sick of them. One last thing of note is that since the game is based on a comic series, there are some attempts to bring that comic style to the game. During the many conversations that occur between stages, the character portraits will be shown, and yes, many of them kinda look funny with Aykroyd looking sorta derpy, but you'll see occasional words be written in a different color. I'm assuming this is to emphasize these words, kind of like how words and speech bubbles in a normal comic strip are bolded. That's just a guess, as I'm most definitely not the biggest comic guy in the world. At least there's no Comic Sans though. We are saved from that. Ex-Mutants really surprised me with how fun and solid it was. Yes, it gets hard quick, even so. The only reason I stopped was due to the frustration with the swamp stage mini-bosses. If it wasn't for that, I probably would have kept giving it a couple more tries. But I do have other games I want to play. However, this game won't sit on my shelf to collect dust, as I can see myself playing it from time to time. Well, It may collect dust since I don't have a Genesis and my Retron doesn't like it, but you know what I mean. If you are a fan of the comic or even platformers that might give you a run for your money, give Ex-Mutants a go. You might be as pleasantly surprised as I was. Final score? 6 out of 7. This is Reaper. Happy fragging.